Should the Miami Dolphins draft Ty Simpson or trade Minkah Fitzpatrick? There are so many questions to be answered about the Dolphins offseason. Let's hop right into it and talk about everything that you need to know in preparation for free agency and the draft. For starters, looking at last season, tons of shakeups. The GM fired. Mike McDaniel, the head coach, fired. Tua is expected to be released. He's battled injury after injury and quite frankly just did not perform well on the field for a lot of the games in 2025. That being said, the Dolphins hire Packers organizational, franchised cornerstone pieces, defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley to be their head coach and assistant GM, I believe, John Eric Sullivan to be the GM of the Dolphins. So super exciting outlook for the Dolphins in terms of having a new message in the locker room and the front office, but disastrous outlooks when it comes to things like free agency and the draft. So let's talk about those two things. First, let's address the team needs and then talk about, cap space, and then last but certainly not least, let's get into the free agency targets and draft prospects that the Dolphins will probably be looking at going into the 2026 offseason. So let's begin. Team needs. Number one, and most importantly, maybe more importantly than anybody else in the league, it is quarterback. Tua is expected to be released before June 1st, probably before the offseason begins, because you have to get the cap right before the season starts. I believe the Dolphins, as of this recording, are underneath the cap. They're negative in the cap, so they need to make some moves to save them some money for 2026. But Tua expected to be released regardless. I think it's not a matter of how or why. It is a matter of when that is going to happen. Next up, Jack Jones is now a free agent. That is one that I think is a pretty big concern for the Dolphins. He plays that slot corner. That's one of the most important positions on the defensive side of the football now. So maybe looking to re-sign him or target somebody else in free agency or the draft. Outside receiver, the other big cut that the Dolphins made. Actually, they've made several massive cuts, but Tyreek Hill was one of them. He's getting released. Jalen Waddle is really the only wide receiver. I think, honestly, he's been kind of misused over the last few years as kind of a gadget guy. I would love to see him take Tyreek Hill's spot as a deep route runner, especially getting a quarterback with an arm that can throw down the field passes better than Tua could. I don't want to, dog on Tua, but deep route throwing was definitely not his forte. Edge rusher. They traded away Jalen Phillips, I believe, for a third-round pick before the trade deadline of the 2025 season. And then to coincide with that, they are releasing Bradley Chubb. I don't believe that's happened yet, but they're looking for a trade partner. If they can't find one, I'm 1,000% convinced that they are going to release him. I saw a few reports a couple weeks ago that the Dolphins were planning on releasing him. So, look for that in the coming days. As of this recording, I don't think it's officially happened, but I do think that it will happen. Next up, interior offensive line. James Daniels was released. His contract was a little too much. I believe his AAV is around $8 million, and the Dolphins, quite frankly, just don't have that on the books right now with having to pay all this money in dead money. Next up is Darren Waller at tight end. He is a free agent, nothing to be released there, but tight end is something that the Dolphins have relied on a lot over the last few years. I think about Jonnu Smith stepping into that role a couple seasons ago and quite frankly excelling at the tight end position. So tight end could be one of use. Think about the Packers. I think looking forward into the model of what the new Packers or what the new Dolphins will look like, it's going to look a lot like the Green Bay Packers system. They've produced a lot of playoff teams over their time there in Green Bay. Jeff Hafley has learned a lot of structural things from head coach Matt LaFleur, as well as John Eric Sullivan, has been in the front office with Green Bay for a little bit of time there. There's a lot of things that Green Bay does right? It's draft and develop. Free agency is not exactly something that gets talked about a lot there because who signs as a free agent to go to Green Bay? But, that's just me saying that. I do think Miami is a much better free agency destination. But let's go ahead and talk about the last team need before I get into the cap concerns and free agency problems. Minkah Fitzpatrick, I believe they would owe him $13 million in dead cap money if they traded him. But overall, I do think that they would save around $5 million on the cap if they traded him. I don't think that's going to happen. I seriously doubt they're going to release him, especially considering that they just traded for him last offseason with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Jalen Ramsey going in that deal. So look for the Dolphins to maybe move him, for like a, fourth, fifth round pick. I don't think he's going to get anything better than that. But that's just because of his age as well as his contract. A lot of teams are either underneath the cap or very close to the cap. They have a lot of other free agency moves to make. They have to sign their rookie classes. There's a lot to be considered when talking about what needs to be done in terms of free agent signings and draft signings. So trades for players with bigger contracts like Minkah Fitzpatrick, it's a little rare to see in the offseason. Now, let's get into the number one issue for the Miami Dolphins this offseason. It's the cap. They are anywhere, I've seen reports as of this recording, anywhere from $6 million under the cap to $3 million over the cap. So other way around, $6 million over the cap, $3 million underneath the cap, meaning they either have $3 million to spend or they have negative $6 million to spend. Now, a lot of things are going to change in the next few days. Tua is going to probably be released. Bradley Chubb is probably going to be released. So that'll probably save them around like $20 to $30 million on the cap. So we could see the Dolphins have around roughly $30 to $40 million to spend in free agency. But if you're looking at some of these free agent acquisitions that the Dolphins are looking at, that does not leave a lot of room to sign a large free agent class. Now, they've got around 45 players on contract already, so it's not like they have to bolster the locker room or bolster the roster a ton. The depth chart's pretty much filled out for what it is. There are just some key needs. The problem is that those key needs, like I've discussed, are extremely expensive. Quarterback, edge rusher, offensive line, and wide receiver as well. Those are going to be some pricey positions, and quite frankly, the Dolphins can't afford it. So let's talk about the free agent targets. First up, I'm going to talk about the three ones that I think the Dolphins should really focus in on trying to re-sign their free agents from Miami. That's Jack Jones. That should be priority number one. He solves the slot corner problem. Now, is he one of the best slot corners in the league right now? No, but the Dolphins are not necessarily in win now mode. Actually, let me pan back. This is a scatterbrain moment, but let me pan back to the outlook of the Dolphins going forward. This is the question that I don't know the answer to, and quite frankly, probably no real reporter outside of a beat reporter in Miami knows the answer to this. What are the goals for the Dolphins? We have seen them be pretty much playoff relevant or, conversationally playoff relevant for the last 3 seasons. Is that going to be something that can be replicated now that you're making all these moves? In my opinion, the answer is absolutely not. If you cut Tua and you cut Bradley Chubb, I think the Dolphins owe over $100 million in dead cap money for the 2026 season. You can't win, you can't win 10 plus regular season games when $100 million of your $300 million in cap space is being spent on players to not play for your organization. That is a major issue. So I think the Dolphins have got to hit the rebuild button. You've got some younger players, but a lot of them are hitting that middle of their career. Like Jalen Waddle is pretty much in the middle of his career right now, especially given the length of a wide receiver's prime. Devon Achane also in that conversation. He's been a phenomenal running back when healthy for the Dolphins, but is he going to be around in 2 or 3 seasons as a premier back in the league? I don't think so. So I think some of the Dolphins' targets here are a little misguided. It's hard for me to see this team being playoff relevant in the next season. Maybe they could do it in year 2, but free agent targets, let's talk about the realistic ones versus the more optimistic ones. I talked about Jack Jones. He needs to be re-signed in terms of making the Dolphins slightly competitive. Rasul Douglas, I know he's 32, but the Dolphins have some major holes there at the corner position. And then Cole Strange on the interior offensive line. He was that weird draft pick out of Chattanooga from New England, gets moved to Miami, never really got the shine that he needed, but I think he could be a reclamation project for the Dolphins, especially considering that the new offensive coordinator for Miami is the previous offensive line coach and run game coach for the Packers, who have had a great run game for as long as I can remember. So Cole Strange could be a cool reclamation project. Now, let's talk about some other free agents that are not the big ones yet. Evan Neal reclamation project. He did not work out in New York. I believe he started out at tackle, didn't work there, moved interior to the offensive guard position. Maybe he was always there, but either way, did not pan out as a first-round draft pick for the Giants. He's an unrestricted free agent. I think his AAV is around $4 million. That could be definitely something that the Dolphins can afford. Tim Patrick, wide receiver. I believe he was previously, obviously he got a lot of shine when Denver, but he was most recently on the Jags, as well as Diami Brown. He was also a Jags wide receiver. Both of their AAVs are around $3 to $4 million. Do I think that they're premier wide receivers? Absolutely not. The problem is, I don't think the Dolphins can afford that if they go after their number one target at the quarterback position, which is Malik Willis. We have heard conversations that he is going to be entering into the Sam Darnold Baker Mayfield range, around $30 to $35 million a year. That would pretty much soak up all of the Dolphins' cap space if they can even get to that number. And I quite frankly think it might be a foolhardy decision, not because Malik Willis can't do the job, but because the roster, like I said, is not built for playoff success over the next year or two. Yes, getting a quarterback on a cheaper deal is a positive thing, but the outlook for the fan base and the organization with kind of a win-now quarterback is a problem. Like, Malik Willis is not a growth and development guy. He is a guy that is supposed to be able to step in and do at least a serviceable job, right? You know, Jacoby Brissett is kind of the reason why the Arizona Cardinals were not able to retain their job. Who are they growing and developing at the quarterback position? I'm throwing Kyler Murray in that as well, but regardless, guys like that are a problem, in my opinion, when you have an organization that's in rebuild mode. Where they're great is somewhere like the Minnesota Vikings or the Seattle Seahawks. You've got a win-now roster, and you can afford to pay a Sam Darnold $30 million. Baker Mayfield, again with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They were recently a Super Bowl team, and they go and get Baker. And so far, they've had winning record after winning record every single year, barring the injuries, of course. But that being said, Malik Willis, this is not a place for him to step in and succeed. You know, now there is an ideal target for me at the quarterback position, and I think almost every single quarterback needy team will be talking to this guy and looking into what he could do for 1 year, and that is Kyler Murray. The reason that everybody is going to be after Kyler Murray is because his contract, unbelievable for the start of the seasons. The Cardinals cut him, and they have to pay him almost all of his guaranteed money for the season. The thing about that is if he goes and signs with the Minnesota Vikings, the Cardinals owe him like $36 million. If he signs for the Minnesota Vikings for $9 million, the Cardinals only have to pay him $27 million. Do you see what I'm saying? They only have to pay as much as the team that he's currently on or currently will be on, the amount of money that they're not willing to pay him, up to that $36 million threshold. So you're realistically going to get Kyler Murray for $1 to $3 million. That would allow you to go grab bigger targets in free agency, and then maybe we can talk about the Dolphins being a playoff relevant team in year one. But I just find that hard to believe. I think Kyler Murray's got some better suitors out there for more of a win now project, where Kyler Murray wants to show the world that he can win football games next year or this upcoming season so that he could sign a bigger deal in free agency the next year. Kind of like what Sam Darnold did coming from San Francisco to Minnesota. Didn't exactly expect him to be the starter, but he wanted to go to a situation where he could continue to grow and develop. He steps into that position in Minnesota. He performs extremely well, and so he signs a nice, juicy contract after that. So that's Kyler Murray's goal. I don't think Miami is the target, but I do think if the Dolphins are trying to win now, that should be the target at quarterback. Now let's go ahead and talk about the defense. Edge rusher, there's a lot of veteran guys that'll be cheap. Kyle Van Noy, previously on the Dolphins, a good leader in the locker room, could be one. Von Miller, if you go and draft young edge rushers, Von Miller is a great guy to learn from. Let's see who else. Kingsley in Gabare? I'm butchering his name. But Packers edge rusher, probably going to follow in the footsteps of Jeff Hafley there, signed with the Dolphins. His AAV is around $6 million. He'd be one of the more expensive edge rushers for this next season. Tight end, Jonnu Smith is the main target for me at tight end. He was there with Miami previously. He kind of fits the role of what they do in Green Bay, and I think that he would be an excellent pickup. Now, he's also one of the more expensive tight ends. He would go around $7 million. So if you sign Malik Willis, you probably can't grab Jonnu Smith. Noah Fant would be the target if you can't draft or sign Jonnu Smith. Continuing to look at the defense, safety, if you trade Minkah Fitzpatrick, I'm thinking of guys like Andre Sisco, CJ Gardner-Johnson, Ronnie Harrison. Ronnie Harrison, I think, is mixed between free safety and strong safety. I think he can play that free safety position. It's a little late in his career, but CJ Gardner-Johnson for that free safety position would be a very strong pickup. Now, that's a guy with some quote-unquote locker room issues. We'll see what that looks like in Miami. I think they'll have a strong locker room, but there's just a lot of problems to be had before then. So those are my free agent targets for the Dolphins. Now let's look at the real scenario. I do think they are looking at every possibility for the draft, including drafting Ty Simpson at number 12. Now, or at number 11. Now, that could be an absolute miss of a pick, considering my most important thing for a young quarterback is having a good scenario around you. The Dolphins do not have that right now, but it would buy the Dolphins a lot of time, the front office and the coaching staff. If you draft a young quarterback, there's just more patience, quite frankly, from ownership and the fan base, because you understand that with a rookie quarterback, you're not going to be competing for a Super Bowl. So that being said, I don't think the Dolphins are going to draft Ty Simpson in the first round, but if he's available in the second round, I wouldn't put it past him. Especially, I think we will all see what the Dolphins do in the draft based off of their free agency decisions. If they don't sign Kyler Murray, if they don't sign Malik Willis or any other, second string quarterback trying to be a starter, they're absolutely drafting a quarterback in the top 3 rounds. Ty Simpson could be one of them. Garrett Nussmeier could be another one. I've seen some crazy comps for, like a Taylon Green in the 3rd or 4th round. That could be a nuts pick, but let's talk about the mock draft that I've got for the Dolphins. In the first round, at pick number 11, Mansour Delane is going to be the number 1 guy for me to pick up. He solves that corner issue. Rasul Douglas, even if you do re-sign him, it's not going to be around forever. He'll probably sign a 1-year deal. Looking at the other picks that I think the Dolphins could make, Akeem Mesidor at edge rusher. He's an older edge rusher. He's not one to grow and develop. I think he's going to be 25 to start the 2026 season, so that could be a questionable one, but one that, Jeff Hafley, it would make a lot of sense why you sign a guy who's ready to compete now. That's why Akeem Mesidor is a valuable first-round pick. But continuing and talking about some of these other first-round picks, Mekhi Lemon, I've talked about how wide receiver Jalen Waddle's the only guy there. I think the Dolphins could absolutely lean offense here. Now, will they do that? Think about who's at the helm of these decisions. John Eric Sullivan, a Green Bay Packer front office executive. What did the Green Bay Packers not do? Draft wide receivers in the first round. They just did it with Matthew Golden, and Matthew Golden really didn't have that good of a season. So I definitely think that it's a possibility, but it's pretty unlikely considering the background of a lot of these Packers guys. But last but certainly not least, Jermad McCoy, a corner out of Tennessee. To be honest, I think these are the 2 picks, Jermad McCoy and Mansour Delane. They're going to probably go after a corner here. Corner in the first round is a premier position to be picking this year, because looking at the actual corner class, in my opinion, it's not very deep. Trying to find value in the 2nd, 3rd, maybe even 4th round is going to be rare, to say the least. So now let's talk about the 2nd round picks. So I think edge rusher will probably be the 2nd position addressed here, unless Ty Simpson is available. If Ty Simpson is available and the Dolphins did not sign a quarterback in free agency, they will most likely be selecting him here. But looking realistically, I don't think Ty Simpson will be here, and I do think the Dolphins will sign a free agent quarterback. So Gabe Yakis out of Illinois, I think he's a big body edge rusher. Kind of reminds me a lot of Ruben Bain, but just a little bit less explosive, but still a guy that can produce at a pretty high level. Illinois had him positioned in like a 5-7 technique. So I think he's got a lot of juice in the tank here. Zion Young, now this is more of a developmental pick, but I do think he shows a lot of promise. He's got a much lower floor than Gabe Yakis, but also, in my opinion, a much higher ceiling. And then last but certainly not least, if you don't find a tight end of value in free agency, looking at somebody like Eli Stowers from Vanderbilt, who put up some monstrous combine numbers, that could be a good pick as well. Those are my second round prospects. Third round, I've got a lot to go over with. Keontae Scott from Miami. There's a couple Miami guys that I like here. You don't see a ton of hometown picks or home university picks, but Keontae Scott is a good one for Miami to pick up. Also from Miami. Dennis Sutton, the edge rusher from Penn State, once again, kind of like Zion Young, more of a developmental growth guy. Then Kamari Ramsey from USC. He could definitely fill that safety spot that Miami's looking to fill. But moving on later in the draft, third round speaking, you've got picks 75, 87, and 90. Emil Wagner from Notre Dame. This is a guy who can kind of move around on the offensive line, just add a lot of depth there. Not necessarily a guy that has to be a starter, but somebody that can definitely fill the hole if you need it. Brennan Thompson, if you're looking for Tyreek Hill's replacement late in the third round, I think that would be a valuable pick. He is a scorcher, a burner. If you don't believe me, go look at his tape versus Arizona State. Caught that game-winning touchdown from Mississippi State. That could definitely be a cool one. Malik Muhammad, good slot corner, not a lot of upside, but a ready to play now and win now type corner. I think he has shown a lot of good tape at Texas. And then Josh Cameron, wide receiver from Baylor. That could also be an awesome pick. He is a playmaker. He's not exactly a volume guy, but he's definitely somebody who I believe would be a valuable selection in the third round. So that being said, that's my outlook for the Dolphins in the offseason. I think there's some promise in year 2 for Miami, but year 1, man, it is going to be rough. $100 million in dead cap money for 2026. That is a depressing figure to look at. You're basically operating at 2/3 capacity. So we'll see what the Dolphins decide to do in free agency and in the draft, specifically at quarterback. That's the one that everybody's going to be looking for. But let me know what you guys think of the Dolphins offseason in the comments. Let me know any other teams that you'd like me to cover in offseason previews. That being said, thank you guys so much for watching. We will see you next time.